folks, we are ready to start the open house session. Please speak into the mic, and the floor is open to you to ask questions to the CEO, CO, CFO, and the president. So let's go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. So during the lunch as well as in the breaks prior to lunch, several of you asked questions to all of us multiple times and on a few topics. So I thought I'll just answer those up ahead. And one was on consulting. I got asked several times, and so as did Praveen, Ranga, and Ravi, Sandeep, and Mohit. The one was on the preparedness of our sales from the point of view of being able to sell the new services. One was around guidance. Specifically, many of you asked about guidance and so forth. And so I'll just mention, there was a fourth one as well, Ranga. Those were the three main ones. Yeah. So I'll just mention these quickly, and then we can get into any questions that are on all of your minds. First of all, on consulting, I think many of you asked about the fact that it is dilutive on the margin and what the relative value of it is, and so forth. That is true. The main assumption around consulting is the ability of our consultants to generate downstream revenue for the rest of the company. And in that sense, over time, we do see that consulting will evolve into a two-tiered kind of a model, where the front line is the one helping us carry out strategic conversations with the clients, and the rest of the consulting helps execute larger numbers of projects with more control in our hands on execution of the projects and so forth. So in that sense, you can see that while consulting itself may not have the right margin profile, it does have the right revenue per employee profile and has the strategic elevation profile to help drive downstream business. And beyond that, over the longer term, the main thing is to help consulting evolve towards a design thinking-led organization that can help elevate the conversations with the client. So this is also something that will take a while. It will take longer than I originally expected. I had expected that by now we'll be able to transform consulting into that kind of a mindset, but it's a different. It will take some additional time. On the preparedness of the sales, this is obviously it's in a sense it is a blessing when you know that that you don't have all the skills and the capabilities to be able to sell the new things. Otherwise, there would not be new things. So then the question becomes: do we have the right attitude, and do we have the right ability to train and learn, and a mentorship and apprenticeship-oriented model to help grow that? And we have been working on that, as Sandeep talked about in his session. And that is, you can never be perfect at it, but in many ways, the culture in our company has been more largely around RFP-driven sales and things like that. So we do want to get away from that, and to the extent that will mean transforming and replenishing our sales organization with newer kind of talent and refreshing the talent and so forth, then we will do that, and we are already in the midst of doing that. So I don't see that as, having seen this kind of a journey many times in my life, I am not particularly concerned. In fact, the rate at which I have seen the pipeline in the new areas grow, both with the specialist ways in which Sandeep talked about, as well as the across the board that Mohit talked about, I feel actually quite encouraged that we're going to do that. And on the guidance related thing, I want to reiterate a couple of things. And Ranga, maybe you can correct me. So there are a couple of points that are important with regard to this guidance. I understand many of you are concerned that there has been volatility or a perceived volatility in how we have in the last few quarters, how this has happened. But as you know, we have always believed in, when I started, Mr. Murthy had told me that we always believe in this idea of minimizing asymmetry, that the information that we see, the six of us and our senior management teams, that our board and us see together, and what you and us see together is always the same as much as possible, that we are sharing with you the information that we see. And obviously that changes. And in the case of consulting and some of these areas, that did take us by surprise in Q1 towards the end. So I want to again reiterate where we are right now is our visibility on Q2 is at present that we will have higher growth in Q2 than we did in Q1. This we are very confident about. We are also at the same time seeing a Q2 in a worse shape than it was at the beginning of the quarter. However, 5 weeks of strong focused execution by all of us and our teams are still in front of us. So therefore, we are going to see how this evolves. Now, when you look at RBS and Brexit and some of these things that have happened during the course of this quarter, the downstream impact of these on Q3 and Q4 is something that we are still yet to assess. So when we look at the remainder of the Q2, the next 5 weeks, and our assessment of what that means in Q3 and Q4, we will give you a better sense of this when we are together with you in October. But this is basically the current situation, and we do see a risk that there could be deterioration, which is also what other people in our industry have seen. So Ranga, these were the main points that I wanted to reiterate. You want to add anything?
I think that's pretty much, Vishal. I think what we have reiterated since morning is that, yes, we are entering Q2 with more uncertainty than we entered in Q2 at this point in time. However, the Q2 growth is likely to be better than Q1, and at the same time, to assess what are the impact of on the Q3 and Q4. While RBS has been there, we don't know whether there are some more or not likely, and also we don't know to what extent some of the current project trajectories would improve. Some of ramping up, clearly some of the projects we see ramp ups. The trajectory of the revenue trajectory of those ramp ups, we have to closely watch over the next 4-5 weeks. I think primarily we are saying is that in October we will certainly will be able to give a much clearer picture. While, as Vishal said, there are downside risks to the guidance, and that is what we are clearly saying. But the more clarity and more importantly, we'll get a much accurate picture when we come in October.
So with that, perhaps we can start with many questions on your minds.
Hi, this is Sumit Pudar from Birla Sun Life Insurance. Just wanted to check on your 2020 vision that we had envisioned, how things change or how are things shaping up on that path?
The entire endeavor, the strategy that we have laid out, the longer term elements that we keep focusing on, and we keep talking about, is towards the long term, and this transformation is going to take time. Of course, we are responsible for quarterly execution as well. This is the burden that we carry. We need oxygen in order to dream. You cannot simply be dreaming. However, I am confident that with the kinds of initiatives that we have launched and the kind of embrace of these initiatives that we are seeing with our clients, that the three main areas that we have talked about, which is revenue growth, margin improvement, and most importantly, revenue per employee improvement, that these are achievable. On a personal note, individual quarterly things don't deter us from that long-term goal, that North Star that we have in front of us. That is, it's not a financial goal in the sense of a guidance or anything like that, but it is a goalpost that we have set up out there. And a next generation services company like the one that we have talked to you about today is one where if we are able to execute on this path, then these will be the 20 billion and 80,000 RPE and 30% margin will be a consequence of the work that we do. This is how we see it. On a personal note, I have to say, and some of you also asked me this question during the breaks, and when I was at SAP, we built HANA, and I launched it in generally available in June of 2012 and 2011, and by December 2012 it had crossed €1 billion in license revenue. And at the time, the entire organization, the whole HANA world was like 200 people, so it was €5 million per employee revenue. And perhaps my perception is quite skewed from that point of view, but I look at it as taking 50,000 to 80,000, which is I understand that 50,000 to 80,000, this is not an easy thing. And from the context that we are all living in and that we have all grown up in, this seems like a very difficult to achieve target. And for the first 2 years, we have not seen so much movement and so forth. But on the other hand, we have seen evidence of the kind of growth that is possible when you have something very differentiated that you can bring to scale. So, yeah, so I think this is still our ambition, and a couple quarters here and there don't change that.
Sure. But do you think, or has there been any instance which has led to kind of rethink in the way you want to achieve that? Of course, you mentioned that it's a journey to the North Star that you are seeing there. Of course, I mean, timeline may be earlier or later, 2-3 quarters here and there. But do you think that you had to kind of rethink
no, we are not changing
the way?
The renewal of our existing services on the basis of automation and innovation, entering into completely new areas that we never did before and helping our clients get there, and doing so on the firm basis of values and culture and education. This is independent of what happens in the course of a quarter. This is what we are doing, and we are committed to doing that. And if we, also the important thing, I know we are all in the August company of lots of financial people here, but the important thing to realize is that 20 billion and 30% and 80,000 is not the goal. It is a consequence of the work that we will do in the course of building a great next generation services company. I mentioned this in my shareholder letter for those of you who have read it, that this will be the footsteps that we leave behind. It is, we should not confuse that with the goal, but we are committed to getting there, and but as a consequence of the work that we do, not as the goal in itself.
Sure. And in the journey, have you found any accelerators which can actually be helpful as such?
Software that achieves ridiculous adoption.
Right. Great. Thanks and all the best.
Yes, Puranik bhai. Do you want to press the mic?
In the morning session, one thing that struck me most was the elevated level of conversation you talked about. And the CEO and his men, all of them talked about this in serious depth. This is very critical to create scale economies. It's very critical to take accounts from 10 million to 100 million and beyond. So in this context, I want to understand what's the level of preparedness in terms of mentoring, training, the next level, getting the next 100 people to talk like you, who can connect with the board, who can connect with the CXO level organization, and get to sell, get to reimagine customer business model, in turn make customer reimagine his own business model, and the challenges that he faces, the pain point he faces. How many can find proactively the problem and also build a solution together? So, and going the next level is, how do you convert the 100,000 people design thinking organization to 5,000, 10,000 people, smart people who can really build solution? In combination, the $20 billion objective is not difficult to achieve.
Very well said, Puranik bhai. I can. What you have laid, the question you have asked is the heart of the matter. That is what is at the heart of our journey. We are not there yet. We are not even close, to be honest, to be candid. When we look at, Sandeep and I were talking about this, when we look at the conversations that we have had with clients like Hershey's or Procter & Gamble or Syngenta or NAB or UBS or these kinds of companies, where we have done, where we have achieved success in strategically elevating the conversation, in having board level conversations, doing strategic projects of high value, and using that to drive the more normal work as well, and lots of normal work at a large scale. There are still very handful of examples like this. There are not that many. The number of people who can have these kinds of conversations is far too small presently. This is my sense is that in this area, education will not help so much. It will have to be more by example, immersive, getting teams of people along on this journey, and project by project, client by client, nurturing an environment where people will learn this. If we get to the point where 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people inside the company are able to have, 1,000 such conversations or 500 such conversations, this is the goal that we are after. Hopefully, as you have seen over the course of the day, it is not only me now, all our leadership is talking in this way. We are all seeing the opportunity and the thing. But this is all I can say is to pay tribute to your question and say that this is exactly what we are trying to solve. There isn't an easy formula for it. The success of our ability to answer your question is going to determine the success of our company and our strategy. The other half of it is what Ravi talked about, which is the groundswell of innovation. How do you have a conversation, strategic conversation with a client? Mr. Murthy once told me that he was actually even before he started Infosys, he was in France, and he was working with a large client in France. And he said that the CEO was a distinguished CEO of this big company, and he was taking advice from a 24-year-old kid from Anderson Consulting at the time or somewhere. And he said, I was always mystified by how is it that a 24-year-old kid can give advice to such a large CEO, and the CEO actually earnestly listens to what this kid has to say. Obviously, he picked it up from some book or something. This guy has actually no idea how to build a huge company. So when we look at what is it that elevates that conversation, of course, there is the content. You have to know what you're talking about, and you have to have the solution, the content to be able to elevate the conversation, to be able to tell something to the clients that is relevant to their business in a very deep way. You also have to have the confidence and the articulation to be able to do that. And then you have to have the ability to carry that through to make that happen. Some of this we can teach, especially to the youngsters. This is why we are teaching design thinking. The creative confidence, the example that Ravi gave, we do this every time we do this call with our zero distance call. We have thousands of employees, and we hear examples like this. More and more after 1.5 years of zero distance, we see that the kids are developing the creative confidence to be able to speak up and come up with an idea and say, hey, look, this process that you have been running, if you did this, that, and the other can be dramatically improved. That is the beginning. That is the other journey. That will also take some time, but that is the bottom-up journey. And the top-down journey will be to start from the top and do this. So once these two rivers meet, which should happen in the next year, 2 years, then we will be closer to that goal. Do any of you want to add anything to this?
Thank you.
Viju?
Yeah, thanks. I've got, I'm going to ask you a question that a research, technology specialist asked me, how can, do you believe in design thinking that Infosys is doing? I said, I don't know. He said, how is it possible that you can make people trained in design thinking with just 1 day of training? Shouldn't it require a lot more intensive preparation? So that's the first question. With 1 day of training, how do you expect people to just sort of pick up principles and embed that in real life project work?
That's a great question, Viju. You cannot. Simple answer is that you cannot turn a bricklayer into Picasso in 1 day. It takes, if you look at great designers, it takes decades of work. There is a principle around 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to make somebody into world class and so forth. That is not so much the point. Design thinking fundamentally is about practicing it, about becoming immersive, becoming immersed in a way of working. So if you create in parallel a culture where everybody asks questions. So with zero distance, one of the things that Ravi has done is we have this idea that the project teams actually meet every Friday afternoon and talk about what is it that they can do to improve the project and so forth. And that gives you the deliberate practice of months and quarters and years that then gets you closer to this kind of an idea. So what is the point of the 1 day? That 1 day is very carefully designed, first of all. It was designed by 3 of the faculty from the Stanford D School. And Sanjay Rajgopalan, who heads our design team, and himself is a PhD graduate from Stanford's design school. You can look at a child. somehow up until the age of 8 or 9, a child has a curiosity. They are constantly asking why. My younger son is 8, getting close to 9 now. Somehow around the age of 9, this curiosity starts to die down. Our schooling, our education, the oppression of homeworks and everything kills this curiosity out of our children. And then all of a sudden, you take this design class and you realize that you actually always had the curiosity. You never lost it. So the purpose of the one-day class is not to turn somebody into a designer and then he goes and says that, oh man, look, I am a designer now. But it is to reawaken that sense of curiosity in a person, that I can look at a project, I can look at a room, and I can see what is missing, and I can ask a question, why, and then I can do a rapid prototype to try out a few ideas and so on. That reawakening can happen in one day, and it does happen in one day. For our sales team, the program is 2 days long. There is also a customized one for the sales team. For the consulting team, it is 3 days long. And then for some of the senior executives, we do this dedicated 2.5-week program at Stanford, where they spend actually 2.5 weeks together over the course of 15 months to go through that. That is only for 200 people. So it is different grades of how you teach this. But you're absolutely right. Anybody who comes and tells you that after going through a 1-day-long workshop on design thinking, you suddenly became a designer, this is absurd.
Sure. And one more question. When you talk about new age solutions, often they end up being point solutions, and one of the things you'd want to understand from Infosys perspective is how do you embed scalability into that? Because many a time these end up being point solutions and at best door openers. So from our point of view, how are we going to ensure that they take the boss of scalability in those kind of offerings?
I think that's also a great question. I think that scalability should not mean giving everybody the same thing. But scalability should mean that being able to do thousands of things in the same way. And even though each of those thousands of things are different and unique, we are a services company. If we don't help clients solve their individual problems, even though those individual problems are individual, but do so at a massive scale, then who will? Now, there are plenty of product companies out there that make one thing for everybody, but then everybody gets the same thing. This kind of misses the point. Our endeavor is to be able to perfect the how, the process, the scalability of being able to deliver a unique innovation that is relevant to you, but do the same thing in thousands of times. If we manage to get that done, that is far better than being able to, make one thing that applies to everybody.
And finally,
So that it's a difference between the what and the how.
And finally, when you talk about client mining, I think one of the natural limitations to client mining is the maturity of various service lines itself. I think BPO needs a lot of work, for instance. There might be a couple of others also. So do you think, therefore, there will be a natural limit to where your client mining can reach if you don't sort of get these service lines, working well enough?
Absolutely.
So then does that mean that you may not, so how should we read the leading indicators? Should we just look at your BPO growth or certain other segments where you've historically not done well to figure out, if your client mining is improving?
That's again a great question. Until the service lines are transformed through leadership and retraining, improving the skills and so forth, a refurbishing of it, the way that we can get there is by augmenting the teams with specialist teams, with better teams. So one of the things that Ravi and Sandeep have done, for example, in BPO in the last 4 months or 3 months or whatever, is we have augmented the BPO teams because in many cases they are not capable of having certain kinds of conversations. They just don't have that comprehension. They don't have that ability to articulate and conceptualize things and then execute them. So what they have done is they have actually augmented specialist teams from, in Ravi's case, with the delivery lines, and Sandeep's case with the sales team. Like Sandeep himself, we had day before yesterday here in Pune, we had a huge client that came here from his portfolio, and he came to Pune one day before all of us did, and actually spent the whole day with the team. It was a BPO client, but it was a complete boundaryless, as Ravi talked about. And just before we got here, they were both showing me this SMS that they got from the client about how they thought that. So I think the simple answer is that you get there by attaching and scaffolding the quote-unquote weaker service line, but over time the answer is to elevate the service line. But I think both of you should comment on this.
Sure. So Vijay, what we did in the last 3 months with BPO, as you picked up on that point, the first thing is we had some quick wins. So we kind of looked at integrating the sales force of BPO along with the larger sales force of Infosys. So the BPO sales force actually becomes a horizontal, and we get the larger sales force of Infosys to sell BPO services as well. So that was a quick win. So that gives us an ability to do upsell, cross-sell, which you spoke about, with all the clients Infosys has, where we don't have BPO, but we have other services running. So that was a quick win. So one of the indicators is to see how much of that we could upsell. It may not be new clients, but it would be existing Infosys clients where we don't have BPO services. The second, I think the color of BPO services is going to change completely, as I mentioned in my talk. It's going to be a lot more integrated with infrastructure and with applications. We are going to see a lot more BPO of that kind. So a leading indicator, going back to your terminology, is if we are winning more integrated deals, if we are actually doing pitches which are very integrated. Sandeep actually did one two days ago. We're seeing a lot more integrated pitches of infrastructure, BPO, digital, and applications. The third is value-added services on core traditional BPO. That is another indicator. So if I can do forecasting on BPO, BPO is, in some sense, we've relegated it to a past thing and not a future thing. When you take over a process, you can take over a process and add layers on top of it, which could be forecasting, which could be analytics. And how much of those services we could sell will again be another indicator, in my view, of getting there. The contemporary next generation BPO is going to be very different to just doing a lift and shift of a business process. How do you digitize it? How do you automate it? How do you innovate that process? In some sense, most firms like ours looked at consulting as the tip of the spear to build downstream. I actually think the consulting opportunity will come from the bottom upstream, where you take a process and innovate it and actually transform it. So you will go completely the other way around. You will start seeing consulting opportunities at the bottom.
So I have one question, Sandeep here. Yes, Sandeep here from Edelweiss. So Vishal, if you see in last few years, the productivity in a way has started going up. I'm not talking about 50,000 to 80,000, but if you see there is a fall obviously in the revenue growth rates, and there is a sharper fall in employee addition rate. Now, which kind of probably incentivizes this stream itself, where you go and look for resources. Now, going forward, if you see our business is transforming for the whole sector, if we are looking for an elevated level of relationship, probably the skill set requirement will be more different. So there are two questions related to this. First is that will this not result in consistent higher attrition going forward as well, because there will be a mismatch of the skill set to some extent, and you will not always be able to compensate it or overcome it with training. Second, with further fall in employee growth rates, means the industry not adding more people, the stream will look out of flavor, and so basically which will result in even lower number of good people coming in, which probably would result in you go and looking for people outside India, and probably they will come at a higher cost. So your revenue productivity in that case will be much more demanding than what you would be seeing today. So how do you address these two issues?
I think that's a great question. There are several layers to that, several perspectives or aspects to that question. One is the availability of skill. The one is the ability to train people, and one is the ability to amplify people with software. All have to be done. Ultimately, having a few geniuses at the top who can have a few hundred conversations is not the answer. You need a large base, and the entire base has to be elevated. The base has to be elevated in a way that the education and the software that we build for the people ends up amplifying them so that they can do much more than they would just as a person by themselves. So we have taken steps in that direction with Mana and with Assist Edge and so on, where we can actually, a person with Mana, an Infosys with Mana, is far more than an Infosys by himself or herself. And so if we are able to do these three things, I think the skill availability itself is not such a big deal. Our ability to train is a bigger deal than our ability to amplify them with software is an even bigger deal. There are many examples of great services companies in other industries, not in IT, in airlines, for example, or in hotels and so on, where you can clearly tell a person belongs to a culture, belongs to a category of service that is unforgettable. We have all examples of our favorite airlines or our favorite hotels where this category of service exists. And then yet you look at it and you say, they are bringing in people and they are creating this kind of an elevated experience. How is that working? That context around the people that you create elevates them, makes them a unique provider of service. You can replace them with somebody else. And but the same category of service and same category of value that they deliver continues to be the case. That is a function of the outer context around the person. In our case, that context includes software, amplification, automation, the ability to do better project management and knowledge management like Praveen was talking about, and so forth. So the skills will be there. I mean, we have 80% of our engineering graduates are driving Uber cars and Ola cars and things like this. You know, they're unemployed. This is not so much the issue. The ability to train them and educate them with the right skills is a bigger issue. And then building great software that elevates them, that amplifies them is an even bigger issue. I see it that way. And I don't see attrition or our ability to pay and so forth as serious issues here. I see the long-term fundamental issue is our ability to teach people and to our ability to amplify them with software. Nabarun is not here, right? Is Nabarun here? Oh, okay. We have a leader who is specifically focusing on this particular part of tooling for our employees beyond Mana and so on. So that's why I thought about it.
Ananta from Credit Suisse. So Vishal, obviously a part of your strategy is to make sure that you make the right bolt-on acquisitions to add to skills, etc. But I would think that the work culture within many of these organizations is dramatically different from the work culture within Infosys and organizations such as yourself, and especially in some of the softer aspects. So but at the same time, they'll need to work very closely with the parent. So how do you ensure that they don't really get stifled, and they are able to?
They don't really get what? Stifled.
And and they work sort of cohesively with the rest of the organization.
Yeah, it is. Part of it is the ability to educate. So in our training, and perhaps Binod can add something. In our training, we do create training for soft skills and cultural skills, negotiation, discussion, articulation, even things like dress code and so forth. So that covers a part of it. The other part of it comes from experience, from having been there. So one of the things that we have been working on with our marketing team of all the people is to turn our on-site Infosys, there are about 30,000 on-site Infosys, into ambassadors of the company, into the way that we work and having that. This is an area that we are not, and by we I mean now more generally the industry that we are in. Everybody is like this. We don't do a particularly good job of creating a situation where the employees who come in to work. The question was around M&A, the acquisition people, their culture. That is what. Oh, not the culture at the on-site. Oh, the M&A. No, this is not such a. I mean, a cultural fit, in fact, with the founders is something that we actually look for at the time of acquisition as a key metric. Without an alignment of purpose, it doesn't make sense to acquire a company.
So Vishal, this was more.
But I mean, the part of his question, which applies to us becoming a part of our employees' teams, our clients' teams, is an even more important one.
So see, as an example, if you acquire, hypothetically, say, a design firm, right, and the type of people who work in these design firms are very different from the the standard engineers that maybe Infosys recruits, right? So how do you ensure that they continue to to work well and thrive in this combined environment?
This is now quite far into the hypothetical world. We are not on the verge of acquiring a design firm.
Take the example of Panaya and Scava.
I think Panaya and Scava is a more realistic example because we acquired these companies and all the key employees are still with us. I think that alignment of purpose helps a lot, and then creating one of the things, and Sandeep has in his role the retail and CPG industries where he brings Scava a lot, has seen this, creating a mindset where the acquired companies train and engage people from the other parts of Infosys and bring them along on their journey helps a lot. We have done this with Panaya to a large degree with our package implementations team. We have done it with Scava with the digital team, and so on. And also you have to make sure that the founders and the key employees of the acquired company are constantly engaged in the work that they do. So there isn't there are lots of companies that buy, companies en masse and then, cut loose the founders and stuff like that. I think that misses the point of an acquisition. You're buying a company in order to acquire a new set of skills and to go on a great journey together. It helps to make sure that you bring the culture along as well. The what's and the hows will work themselves out if the why are we doing what we are doing aligns with itself. You want to talk about that?
So, just to take an example of Scava itself, right? So some of the acquisitions we've done has intellectual property. So your question is very pertinent, that how do you keep the culture intact? But you can't keep them at a distance, because if you keep them at a distance, you could keep the culture intact, but you can't actually leverage the synergy of why you acquired them. We acquired Panaya, we acquired Scava, all of them had synergy to some part of a business. So what we did was we kind of kept the engineering of those products intact. We kind of kept that innovation engine intact, and we integrated the go-to-market and got the reach of Infosys behind them. That was the reason why we acquired them. So there isn't a magic formula, but every time we do this, if we tuck in an acquisition with IP in it, you have to hold that IP, you have to hold that entity which is building it, give that cultural, catalysm on top of it, but take the synergies out and create the go-to-market around it. So that's what we did with all our acquisitions. We ensured that the go-to-market is driven through the Infosys teams, and that's why we got them in, because we could use the reach of Infosys and get them through the entire install base of Infosys. So that's how we look at it. I think more of those acquisitions as they come in, we'll have to keep it intact, not at a distance that we can't synergize them, but still at a distance so that you could keep that culture intact.
Ashish from Motilal Oswal. Vishal, I wanted to know, while a part of the transformation journey is to keep adding capabilities in new areas, but I guess probably the other part is also to let go some of the existing areas. So to that extent, do you think there are parts of the portfolio that you think Infi will be better off without, or they are challenging or not scalable, or something that you would probably want to weed out?
I think it happens naturally. On its own, you see the parts that are not growing particularly well, and there is a natural degradation in response to the needs and the circumstances in the market and so forth. One of the things that both Praveen and Ravi talked about was the breaking down of the barriers across the service lines and across geos and verticals and so forth, so that people are more malleable. But that also comes from training. So we have gradually transformed our training to be more general, create more generalists with the ability to acquire specialized knowledge rapidly. At even very basic levels like programming languages, we teach programming concepts with 3 languages at the same time since March of last year, and about 9,000 people with this class of education have showed up in our workforce in the last 18 months, and you see a dramatic difference between how they acquire new skills versus the ones before that, who used to associate themselves with that I am a Java person or a .NET person or SAP this or Oracle that. So that it makes a huge difference in how you acquire skills and how you create a more malleable kind of a work structure, that a particular service line or a particular way of working might decline and disappear, but the people can just be upskilled and transition to a new area and so forth. So to have a more fluid setup in that regard is far more important than to be bound by the individual boundaries.
Hi, Yogesh. So from HSBC. Vishal, I have two questions around automation. Firstly, from a management point of view, you have given a guidance and there is certainly pressure to achieve the annual guidance, including the 2Q. Is there sometime temptation to delay some automation just to avoid the deflation in certain projects? And secondly, related to that, from a mid-management perspective, let's say a project manager, how do you see the incentives for that manager if his project is going to see 10% deflation with automation? How would you appraise the manager?
Very good questions. I think part of it is incentives. Is there somewhere in the organization some kind of a temptation to do something like this? For sure, there must be. And I think that we have to be disciplined in resisting that, in avoiding that. Ravi talked about it in his session earlier. The need to disrupt ourselves, even though it is painful. That's the only way that we grow. It's not easy. The human instinct to protect the way that we have been is very, very strong. It is not easy to do that. Incentives is one way to do it. Education, constant staying focused on messages is another way to do it. Creating disciplined execution is another way to do it. After all, we live in a democracy, but we don't work in one. You know, you can make changes, and so this is. It has to be a combination of all of those. The disruption is hard, but I want to ask Ravi to specifically talk about this, perhaps in the context of Mana or zero distance, how you have done zero distance incentives, Ravi.
So that's a great question, actually. You know, every day we grapple with this, and the ability to embrace this will depend on how well we incentivize our teams. It's so funny, right? You have to incentivize your teams to shrink themselves in the interests of the future. And there are a bunch of ways to do it, starting from double counting the software which is being sold in context to the accounts you're in, so that you could actually get the revenue still accrued to those teams, though there aren't people around them. That's one. The second way of doing it is creating a culture of content and depth and not based on span. A majority of Indian firms, or the culture by itself is all about, do I have these many people working for me? That's breadth of services, and all managers in IT services firms in India are used to actually building large teams. How do you actually create a culture of creating depth and creating specialization on depth, and therefore span is not the only way you can grow. So ability to create those work streams is another way of incentivizing it. So there are a variety of ways to look at it and incentivize it. Margins, margins is a big indicator for all our teams. Margins are higher if you actually cannibalize yourself. You might shrink on revenues, but you might have an uptick on revenue per person and margins. So we have actually put all of that in place. In zero distance specifically, we have created an incentives mechanism where you could go and mine accounts, and every project manager in Infosys who could mine those accounts, create a zero distance template, convert that into a project for ourselves, actually gets incentivized for it. So in some ways, we believe that the sales teams at Infosys are not the only ones which are selling. The sales teams at Infosys, there is an extended set of project managers who could also upsell, cross-sell, and mine accounts. So they actually walk the corridors of our clients. So they have a better pulse of what can be done grounds up. So we've actually, inculcated that culture in there. culture again is a long drawn thing. You can't do it overnight. You just have to keep doing it. You just have to create role models in the system. We have a mechanism to create role models in the system. So we've kind of done this very institutionally, and I believe it's a question of a couple of quarters. We'll see this far more in an accelerated way.
Sir. Yeah. So this is Priyanka from Motilal. I had a couple of questions. So the subcontracting cost has been rising over the years. So is that a structural shift that is taking place in the IT industry? And the second part, if you can comment on the on-site pyramid structure, please.
Hi. Let me take both the questions. Yes, the subcontractor cost, the way we have looked at it is as a percentage of revenue. If you look at Q3 of FY16, it had touched 6.3% of our revenue. Then in Q4, we said, look, we have to bring it down without impacting the business. We brought it down to 5.4, and subsequently in Q1, further it came down to 5.2. Well, the trajectory is important. In a quarter, certainly if certain project ramp-ups happen on site, typically the new project ramp-ups happen on site first, then there could be quarterly volatility, but the direction that we are very clear that we want to bring as a percentage of revenue down. Having said that, why is there a need for subcontractor costs? Typically, they're all on site, and typically when we need to kind of staff a particular engagement, and without letting go of a part of an engagement, where we do not have an internal staff, whether visa ready and things like that at that point in time, we go for subcontractor. Well, is all of that like that? Certainly not. We do believe that some of the subcontractor costs are also because of lack of better planning, talent planning. And that's not uniform across services. Certain services, we need to do better talent planning. I think Ravi's organization is already focusing. Some of the reductions that we saw between Q3 and so far has been primarily to look at that particular component. I think this is where we are on the subcontractor costs.
Yeah, so, Naga's covered most of it. Subcontracting as a percentage of revenues, we are trying to keep it in control, right? You've seen it in the past few quarters. Subcontracting is actually not bad if you do it very strategically. There are clients who want us to take over their contractors, and over a period of time phase them out and get our employees in. An opportunity of that kind, I think we should jump in and do it, because it's a value add to the client, it's value add to Infosys. There are clients where we see very specialized skills, and we by design don't want to build those skills, say hypothetically. We could get in there. Or there are clients where we see a spike in demand and we use them. If you use it for these purposes, I think it is fairly okay. If you use it for in a very inefficient way, where you are not planning your demand well, you're not planning your talent well, then it is not good. But I don't see that going away. Strategically, it's good and healthy as long as you keep it as a percentage of your revenues and keep it in control. But then thereafter, you have to look at the reasons why you're doing subcontracting and have them in control. That, I think, is the essence of subcontracting. We've started recruiting a few of our subcontractors into our roles, and wherever we found them to be suitable in the Infosys context, that's been very successful in the past few quarters. So that's been a way of controlling. Margins on subcontractors is very important as well, right? If the margins are healthy enough, you should still do it, provided it's a short-term fix.
On the on-site, I think you also asked about the role ratios. And see, I think if you look at the role ratio, typically we have seen the on-site role ratio being slightly more richer than the offshore role ratios. And the pyramid is much more, flat, kind of flatter there on site. So we are saying, we have got a very simple approach to this, saying that, look, while we understand certain projects will be on-site heavy, and in the initial period, there'll be on-site role ratios will be more richer, is the billing rate, concomitant billing rate reflect the on-site role ratio? That's the more important point. For example, if a person goes from India as JL4, as a software engineer, continues in a project, gets promoted, then becomes project manager, then the differential in the billing rate on site, is it steep enough to offset the differential in the salary cost? I mean, finally, that will be the economic math. What we are doing is, at the same time, we do have, limited visas and things like that. What Ravi and team are doing is we are looking at all the fixed price projects, on-site fixed price projects, where we are asking clients flexibility to rotate some of those people into fresher, newer projects that are coming up, so that we reduce the richness of the role ratio in ongoing projects. At the same time, we have sufficient number of people to get deployed on site in new projects. I think that's the exercise that our delivery team is leading under the leadership of Ravi. And it is too early, and we have made the beginning. We have had some interesting outcomes this quarter, but we want to accelerate that. Coming to offshore, I think the pyramid is very healthy offshore. But as you also know, our offshore employee costs are only 16-17% of revenue. If any meaningful impact has to come from role ratios, it has to come from on-site. The other part on role ratio is also relating to automation, right? Automation, just releasing the junior most folks in India is not going to have, even if it's tens of thousands of people, it is going to have minimal impact. I think finally the automation has to release across the pyramid, and more so across the pyramid on-site. That's where we will see meaningful impact. I think that's where, again, Ravi and team in all the automation efforts, they're not just focusing on how many people we are releasing. I think increasingly the emphasis is also on what kind of pyramid are we releasing. I think that's where on-site role ratio is important.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rahul from Systematics. So our effort to get on the strategic discussion, getting on the table kind of effort, are these conversations restricted to the from a perspective of an event like RBS where there's a big risk. So is there any security which we are building, or it is just to secure the existing business?
Absolutely. That is exactly all of the above. That is exactly the endeavor. It is to have the strategic conversation on the things that the client cares about and throwing our brain power on it, bringing our intellectual property in a way that is strategic to them and applies to their most important areas. I mean, for example, in Mana, we have started to see tremendous areas, with many that we didn't even imagine. And Mohit and I have been working with some banks where Mana has some incredible applications that we never foresaw. And also to help buffer against downturns. And in many cases, we have been able to do that by leveraging the strategic relationship. In many cases, it is unavoidable and inevitable to, like the kind of thing that happened with RBS, where the shutdown of the Williamson Green program simply had to be done. And then you just work with the client on how best to avoid it and deal with it and so forth. So elevating the strategic conversation is going to have all of those benefits once we are able to get there. In response to the earlier question that Puranik Bhai asked, it is the same idea. We are still very early. We have many examples, like outside you see some examples of projects and testimonials from some customers. But we need to get many of these going, many hundreds of these going, and that's when we'll start to feel better about it.
And in an economics kind of a language, how do we get the bargaining power of a supplier? We see other industries where even an ancillary player with kind of an offering, it gives, keep respect with its margin or the business command on it. So
my experience over the last 2 years has been that we are not there. Not only us, but our entire industry. It is much more a commoditized, procurement-oriented decision-making and things like that. We have not generally succeeded in elevating the conversation to one where we would be immune from those kinds of risks. This is what we need to get to. We're slowly getting there. I mean, we have many examples now that have emerged, but we are slowly getting there.
We have time for one last question. Ashwin?
IMS and cloud business. Now, you're almost 1/3 the size of some of your competitors or peers in that space, and you ideally should have a much lesser impact in terms of the legacy shrinkage that's happening in that space. And correspondingly, you should be benefiting in terms of the newer business that's coming out in cloud, security, those pieces. But our growth there seems not to be industry leading. So what's holding us back? Is it scale? Is it capabilities? What are we trying to change that? Because from a downstream business perspective, that could be a big business.
Yeah, I mean, Nari is sitting back there. He has recently taken over the cloud business. It is an area of significant growth for us recently. It is a capability matter. Maybe Ravi and Nari can add. It's a matter of getting the right capabilities. The kinds of economics and the kinds of solutions that are becoming available in cloud are growing at an extraordinary velocity. So we have to keep up with that. You saw in the morning in my presentation some of the quotes from our partners like AWS and Microsoft Azure and so on, where we are working heavily with these guys to bring the kind of skills necessary. But by and large, the kind of business that we have there today is still, like Ravi said, lift and shift of existing landscapes and so forth. The more automation, the more tooling, the more scale, the more next generation capabilities that we can bring in, the better. And of course, also together with that, the traditional capability building, the basic capability building itself. But I mean, I think my sense is, Ravi, that the cloud business the CIS business has been growing far more rapidly in the last 15 months or so than in the past.
Yes, so you're right. Historically, the infrastructure and cloud business at Infosys as a proportion of our revenue was not very high. So the good news is we weren't an incumbent, so we can actually go in now and go in with a more contemporary solution, which is powered by Mana, powered by our automation story. And that story is actually winning a lot of business. In fact, if you see the pipeline of wins in the last 4 quarters, a majority of them are actually with an infrastructure tinge. A lot of it actually we have won is in the infrastructure space. So you will see an uplift of infrastructure services for us. So that's one. The second is, in the past, we did not actually do asset-heavy deals in the past. We have not made that distinction now. If it makes sense to a client, if it is transforming a client, if it makes sense to us, we have started being very aggressive on it. So we do deals which are important for the client, important for their landscape, important for us. Migration into the cloud needs a lot of partnerships, especially deals of this kind have a lot of pass-through. So you need to do a lot of partnerships, very proactive partnerships. So we've started building that up. And then it also needs a lot of third-party skills. It's a very comprehensive set of skills you need, very specialized skills. So we've started building that up. So there is capability building, pipeline building. I'm very, very optimistic about the infrastructure space at Infosys. I've not seen that kind of traction in the past. In the last 4 quarters, I would say this is one of our fastest growing service lines in the company.